Advent is one of those seasons of the church, the time of waiting for Christmas, that is apt to draw people like myself, who was an evangelical Christian, deeper into the historical liturgy of the church and into liturgical traditions like Catholicism. That's what it did for me, and for my guest this week, Tsh Oxenreider. She has a similar experience and shares her wisdom as an author of a wonderful book of Advent reflections on how Advent can draw us in, the power of conversion through Advent, through deepening our love for the liturgy and liturgical practices, and the traditions, the rituals, the trappings of Advent that can draw us deeper into our relationship with Christ, deeper into a love for that season of waiting leading up to Christmas, and how we can do that well. Maybe you are a brand new Catholic. Maybe you're a non-Catholic Christian looking into what Catholics are doing over here with things like Advent. Maybe you've been a Catholic for a long time and want to deepen your understanding, your practice, your love for the season of Advent. Well, this is the episode for you. So you want to do Advent well. Here are some fantastic tips, some insights from a couple of evangelicals who had to figure it out for themselves, who were drawn deeper into these traditions. And my guest this week, Tsh Oxenreider, who brings her fantastic wisdom on the subject on how we can really do Advent well. It's a wonderful conversation. I hope that you love it. Please watch this and enjoy. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Thanks for watching. Thank you for listening. If you are listening on podcasts, thank you very much. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify, if you can leave a rating or review, that helps to push the podcast out to more listeners. Extend the reach of conversations like this one, and thank you for listening. If you are watching on YouTube, thank you for watching on YouTube. Make sure you hit the bell, subscribe to this channel, leave some comments, do all those fun YouTube things that you guys do on YouTube, and thanks for watching there as well. Guys, we're in for a treat this week. I am joined by Tsh Oxenreider. She is an author, the writer of fantastic books, and a wonderful little newsletter as well. She is a longtime podcaster, host, co-host of A Drink with a Friend, a wonderful podcast, very popular in our household. She's a convert to the Catholic faith, and she, aside from that, does all kinds of wonderful things that we'll dig into here. And I am just thrilled to have you back on the show again, Tsh, this week. Thanks for coming back on the show. I don't know how I tricked you into coming back for a second time, but thank you, welcome, and hello.
Hello, it's good to have you. I was going to say it's good to have you back on the show. It's your own show. It's good to have you on your show. But your show is big in our household as well. So
Okay, so that's a fair enough statement to have me on my show, because I got to say this. Your episode, what I'm going to say maybe, your episode of my show that we did a while back on your conversion story is one of the most popular episodes of this show that we've done. The listeners love it. It's really widely downloaded still years later. And welcoming me to my show is apt, Tsh, because that episode, I think I didn't talk for the first hour of the show. You just told your story, which is ironic that it's the most popular episode of the show, because I barely say anything. So that's special to me to be able to be on my own show with you.
Well, and afterwards I felt that like secondhand, afterwards, like, what did I do? Oh my gosh, I couldn't shut up. So I'm so glad you found that endearing. Because I just had a lot to say, I guess.
Yeah, you know what? Me and everyone listened to the show, so it's great. I loved it. This as a podcast host yourself, Tsh, it made editing really easy because you did all the talking, and it was just seamless. Right. And so it was wonderful. We all loved it. I loved it. Everyone, it was wonderful. So I'm happy to welcome you back on the show. You do a lot of things, and one of those things that you do, one of the books that you've written is all about Advent. And so I was thinking about Advent. It's big in our house for us. I think maybe for you guys as well. Advent was, can I say, like the gateway drug into liturgical living and liturgical practice. It was one of those things for us as evangelical Christians, my wife and I, that kind of began to draw us into more liturgical kind of space, mindset, living, when our kind of evangelical church we were part of at the time began to celebrate Adventish type kind of things. And suddenly we were drawn into this thing that was really foreign for both of us in our evangelical backgrounds, and began to open up doors, forced us to ask questions we hadn't thought of or considered before. And now as Catholics, changed our whole practice of that season leading up to Christmas, and fundamentally really changed how we frame the calendar, the year, like our whole living year to year as a family. It really revolves around these kind of things like Advent and Lent and Easter and Christmas. So I thought, let's have you on the show, Tish, to kind of talk about Advent, but talk about it uniquely on this show with a bit of an evangelical kind of spin to those listeners who, first of all, maybe are new Catholics, who are brand new to the practice of something like Advent, maybe, and those who are kind of like we were, kind of like I think maybe you guys were, looking at kind of Catholic-y kind of things like Advent as non-Catholic Christians, and going like, what are they doing there? Like, this is interesting. What can I take of this and begin to live more deeply? So that's kind of the framing of this thing. And I think I mentioned to you before we began to record, it would be kind of cool to start with a bit of your story. Now, listeners have probably heard this because everyone's just devoured an episode of your conversion story earlier on the show. But I think if you guys are anything like we were, Advent was a thing that for us kind of drew us deeper into the liturgy, coming from a non-liturgical background at all. So was there a similar trajectory for you guys and for you in your journey, that this was a thing that maybe began to draw you deeper into the liturgy? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it absolutely was. I grew up, I grew up in a wonderful Christian home. But definitely evangelical, and definitely completely devoid of any sense of something like a liturgical calendar. I didn't even know that was a thing. I hadn't heard of that. That was a foreign. I mean, it wasn't that I was like wondering. It was like I didn't even think of it. Like, I suppose I can look back and think like, had I ever thought about why December 25th is Christmas and why, like who decides these things? But, those things just don't enter your mind, I guess, when it's just in the culture. But the only thing I knew of Advent in my childhood and youth was, well, two things. One, at my Bible church, we had a wreath up front, and I knew that on the Sundays leading up to it, there would be one more candle lit on that wreath. And it was just kind of this prop in the background. And I think maybe every now and then it would be part of like the service, someone would go up there and light it. But there was never any explanation as to why. And then the other thing I knew of with Advent were the countdown calendars from the grocery store with the like mediocre chocolate in them, right? But those started at December 1st, and they were just a countdown for 24 days till Christmas. And so I just thought Advent was countdown to Christmas. And in some ways it is, but I didn't know it was its own distinct season at all. Not a clue. So we're talking fast forward to my late 20s, early 30s. Well, more like early 30s, really, when I had little kids. And this might be similar to your story too, although I don't know. I can't remember how similar our kids' ages are. I think yours are younger than mine. But I wanted to do something for Christmas with the kids. And I wanted it to be this like, let's do fun things leading up to Christmas, but let's not invent it from scratch. And let's make it about the real reason for the season, And so where do you go? You go to Google and you look things up, and lo and behold, I see certain things. I see like Jesse trees, and I see Advent calendars. And to me, that it was all just kind of a mix. So basically, I went down the rabbit hole of the internet's guidance for how to do Advent at home with little kids. And it was great for a while. We made these little calendars to hang on the wall, and you flip the little things, and it gave us activities. I'm not a crafty mom in the slightest. I did not want something that involved like cotton balls and glitter and googly eyes. So I was trying to find something that was just straightforward. Anyway, long story short, went to, I guess, the Jesse tree, which is, if anyone knows it, it's like kind of like a countdown to Christmas, but you tell the story from Genesis all the way to the birth of Christ, one day at a time. And so I was loving all these little traditions, not really recognizing until, I don't know, a few years into it, wait a minute, there's history to this. I mean, I would have known this wasn't new, but I think my head connected it to just like, internet-based ideas to do with kids. And it wasn't until I kind of zoomed out and there were other things that I started questioning about just why we do what we do in general. And I had mentioned on the previous episode that we used to live in Turkey. And so I was already really interested in the history of the church. So when you start looking into it and you start connecting the dots with the liturgical calendar and, these saints, feast days, and anyway, it all snowballed from there. But Advent was for sure the gateway to all of that for me.
Yeah, it's one of those things that begins to, like you say, lead in a rabbit trail, whether it's Googling it and beginning to, these things come from. I know, for me, I'm thinking back to, it's different now with kids because the preparation for Christmas, I ask my wife, begins like making the lists for the grandparents of things that the kids might want for Christmas, like months ahead of December 25th, right? But when we were younger and when I was younger and evangelical, the preparation for Christmas was like the Christmas Eve service at our Pentecostal church. And the weird thing was like you'd feel Christmas coming sooner than that. You'd go home from university perhaps and be back at home for a few weeks in between semesters or something. There was those kind of rhythms of the season, seasonal changes, but really the thing we do as Christians to prepare for Christmas in like a spiritual sense that was different than like a regular Sundays going to church or whatever, was this Christmas Eve service. And often it would be in lieu of the actual Christmas Day service too, which is funny. It would kind of feel excusey, like, well, we can't do it tomorrow because it's Christmas. No one wants to go to church on Christmas. So we'll do this kind of shortened, maybe outreachy kind of Christmas Eve service, maybe have the lights dimmed a bit, maybe have candles for feeling very adventurous. But there was nothing kind of leading up to that before that.
Yeah.
And I can remember like what you were saying with the Advent wreath. I can remember when our evangelical church, we were non-denominational, meeting at this point of time in a Lutheran building. So there were liturgical trappings around us that would change with the seasons because it was a higher Lutheran kind of congregation. Their priest still wore the Roman collar and he would vest for services. So it was quite liturgical. We see him in between our service and theirs in the lobby kind of wandering around, right? And so there was kind of changing. I remember when the Advent wreath kind of came out and then it was there the first year. It was there and you'd maybe light a candle, every Sunday, but nothing was kind of spoken of about it. It was there. We'd light it as part of the service and that was kind of it. And then the next year we'd talk a bit more about it, talk about maybe what the candles might mean. And I think it was then gone for a year. It was too much and it kind of came back. But one of those things, it's the trappings of something going on there that are pointing to a deeper thing. The Advent calendar with the chocolates, right? The trappings of something historical and deeper there, and really bad. You said mediocre. I'll go with really bad chocolate if I don't know.
Yeah, I was being gracious.
You're more generous. But I think it's kind of interesting, and I don't know if there's something to this, but those were pointing to the deeper history of a season that in itself points towards Christmas. So it's like at the end of a very long tunnel with like a flashlight. Like you begin to see these things pointing down towards Advent, but we're not quite there yet. And Advent itself points towards this thing. I know you were drawn, first into the Anglican tradition, right? Yeah. So that's a step kind of closer to maybe celebrating a more deep Advent. Would that be fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, I remember having a conversation. I was a few years into being Anglican and I had a conversation with a Catholic friend and she had mentioned something about the Catholic tradition of Advent and Lent. And I got offended because I was thinking, they're not Catholic. Like you Catholics don't own everything. Of course, not knowing I would, eat my own words a few years later. But yeah, for sure. The Anglican, I mentioned this in our previous episode, it felt like a safer way to experience more of the liturgy or more of a liturgical approach to worship. But here's the thing, and I think you're alluding to this with your backstory and mine as well, that we actually all have a liturgy. The word liturgy just means the work of the people, right? Yeah. And so we have a liturgy in our services, our church services when we gather, even when we don't formally recognize them as liturgy. We have a way of an order to things, And so I think whenever we have those Christmas Eve services, whenever we have candlelit things, whenever even local churches have their own unique, like we always end with Silent Night with the lights, whatever it is, that's a liturgy. That's a form of liturgy. We have a liturgy to our days. We have a liturgy to our family routines. And so I think humans are hardwired to long for that. We love tradition. We have tradition in the sense of, like we formally recognize tradition, like, obviously there's the capital T tradition of the church, but we're even, families have their own, like we always open gifts on Christmas Eve, or we always eat this for breakfast. But we also just have traditions that we're not aware of. We always brush our teeth before we, do whatever else we next do to get ready for bed. We're just a people like that. We like rhythms, routines, predictability. And so I think the liturgical calendar taps right into that universal human longing for rhythm.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. There's actually a long lost episode of this podcast. It was never ever actually released, and actually I lost it in a hard drive crash a couple of years ago. But I recorded with John Mark Grody on James K. Smith's book "You Are What You Love," which is all about.
Yes.
He's I think a Reformed kind of philosopher, theologian, author. Yeah. Who wrote a book about liturgy and the idea that, I think his example is the mall is a liturgy, right? Going to the mall is liturgy. Yep. And these things are liturgies. Good episode, lost forever.
Oh, that's so sad.
Never released.
That kills me.
Actually, it was pretty rough. It was prior to any recording of anything. We were amateurs, and it was pretty embarrassing. So I'm kind of glad it's lost forever. But you're right. There are those liturgies, right? And I think it's interesting for you. And we did a similar thing. We were already Catholic as our kids. My wife became Catholic and baptized our firstborn son in the same foul swoop kind of thing. And he was, I think, a year or 6 months. So we began when we first, became Catholic at the ground floor, how to then begin to decide what kind of liturgies, what kind of traditions we wanted to do for something like Advent. And then for Easter, I think it's cool that you kind of fell backwards into that in a way, right? You had these kids, you had no liturgies, but were looking for something to do with them, and then fell backwards into the Catholic faith and these kind of liturgical celebrations. And I think it's interesting that, first of all, we have those and we crave those routines and those rituals. We have them whether we know it or not, and we crave them in our lives as well. But then for like Advent, for example, or Lent, or these seasons, the church calls us to intentionally embrace, not by mistake, not just because it's a rhythm or a ritual, but intentionally embrace these kind of liturgies, I guess, to slow down, right? In both Lent and Advent, to slow down and kind of wait in that tension of, I don't know, what I'm trying to say here. I want to say finish my thoughts. That seems a little rude to ask you just to finish my thought, but we're waiting that tension, right? But these liturgies call us and help us with that waiting. Is that a fair way of saying that? I mean, you're the expert on Advent, Tish, not me, so I don't put words into your mouth.
Well, we can't think of Advent as a separate thing without recognizing the calendar as a whole, right? And so it's helpful sometimes to zoom out and think of what the entire liturgical calendar is doing for us, why it's a gift from the church, and then zoom into Advent specifically, because Advent is the new year, right? The first Sunday of Advent is the new year of the church calendar. So, we have Christ the King Sunday, late November, and then the next Sunday it's like Happy New Year, even though it's either late November or early December. That's the first Sunday, and it is the 4 Sundays before Christmas, and then Christmas is actually Christmastide. It is 12 full days, and then we've got Epiphany, and I'm skipping a lot of other things too. We've of course got all the saints days and the feast days, and we've got the solemnity on January 1st, but just to kind of give a broad idea. So after Epiphany, we go into a little bit of ordinary time, although some traditions recognize it a little bit more as an extended season with Candlemas in early February. All this to say, then it leads into Lent, which leads into Easter, which is 50 days, which leads into Pentecost, all the way to ordinary time. And then round and round we go again. Yeah. And so if you think of it like this, it's not, a one and done thing. We recognize this every year, and we, in many ways, are following the life of Christ, starting in Advent, at least leading through Pentecost, and then, recognizing the work of the church, the ordinary time. So zooming into Advent, yeah, it is definitely this sense of anticipation, as is Lent leading up to Easter, but the two have some similarities, but also, some differences. Advent recognizes two forms of waiting. We are anticipating the birth of Christ, so in a sense, we are doing what maybe we traditionally think of in if we're a Christian and we're counting down to Christmas. So we're thinking about Christmas is about recognizing the birth of Jesus. And so it's easy to connect the dots that, so Advent is kind of like expecting that or waiting for that. If you imagine, when you're pregnant and you're waiting for this baby,
I can imagine.
You do things. Yes, you can imagine that. You do things, right? As a family, you get the house ready. You think of what it's going to be like once this baby's here. Your life is going to change. In many ways, there's some parallels to that, waiting for the birth of Christ. And so we'll get into this in a little bit, but practically there's some things you do to kind of stretch out that sense of anticipation for Christmas, which is both fun. I mean, well, it is a lot of fun in the sense, but it's also good and healthy and important for us to recognize that there is that pregnant waiting, because the other thing we're waiting for, because technically Jesus has already come to earth as a baby, right? So in the year of our Lord 2023 and plus, Jesus has already come. So we're not just pretending like, we're going to reenact this every year. We're also remembering that we're still waiting. So we live in the already not yet, right? Jesus says that one day all will be made new, right? And the wrongs will be righted, and there will be no more tears and all that stuff. And we're very, very aware that time is not here yet, right? And so we recognize that we're still waiting, that we still are anticipating something. And so Advent is about those two forms of anticipation, remembering what it was like, with Mary and Joseph waiting on the birth of Christ, and also remembering that we are still waiting for Christ to come and make all things new. And so we get to participate in that. And that is a gift from the church.
Yeah. And fun to explain to children, like, no, Jesus already came. He came. He's not coming again. We're remembering him, but he will come. He will come again.
Right.
But different than as a baby. That's fun. How do you do that? No, I'm kidding.
I know. Yeah. You need a theology degree sometimes.
Yeah. But it is that, I love that twofold kind of waiting, right? It is that, it is that sense of, okay, we're waiting to celebrate this day. And of course, if you have kids, there's and even as adults too, right? There's an excitement of Christmas Day coming and seeing family and presents and great food and getting together with people and enjoying that time and celebrating the birth of Christ in the liturgy. There's that you're waiting for. And there's the coming again, that expectant kind of like that. There's a genius in that twofold kind of waiting, that already not yet kind of waiting. And I guess practically living that out. And I'm thinking again, like, not to sell Advent, but to that person who is, who is doing that Christmas Eve service and that's one and done and there's nothing before that, right? Living out that waiting period, that twofold kind of expectant period, there is so much. I mean, we can get practical in a second, but even just on a larger scale, there's so much in there that's just so valuable for the soul and for that faith practice, right? In that actually intentionally setting that time aside. There's wisdom from the church tells us to do that, right?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it kind of psychologically, many times the waiting is more satisfying than the thing itself. Like if you think about when you're a kid, Christmas, I don't know if you felt this way, but Christmas evening when you're a kid always felt a little bit sad. Like, so tomorrow's December 26th, and then we have to wait a whole other year for this again. And you kind of can recognize, and there's a little bit of a letdown, like, maybe you didn't get the toy you wanted, or maybe it wasn't like all that you envisioned it to be. And so you recognize like, oh, yeah, that wasn't maybe perfect. But the buildup was sure fun, all the things you do to get excited about Christmas. That's the same with other things as well. Sometimes the looking forward to a vacation is more fun than the vacation itself, or whatever it is. Anticipation comes with its own gifts, separate from the event itself. And whenever we try to just bulldoze our way into receiving the gift right away, we kind of miss out on some of that enjoyment, similar to a kid who just like wants to, scarf down their dessert and then they get a stomach ache afterwards. If you don't slow down and savor it, then you miss out on what makes the dessert great to begin with. Similar to that.
That's a great analogy. And I'm glad that, I don't know, this is one of those therapy session kind of things, Tish, but yeah, I can remember that feeling as a kid, Christmas Day evening, right? Oh, okay, well that's like, all right, and there's that I feel full of food. I had these gifts, but I gotta wait now for it. Yeah, you're totally right. That anticipation is, yeah, there's value in that itself. And I guess too, again, thinking of a bit bigger picture, it's a kind of, I know I've heard it described as like a mini Lent, maybe kind of a penitential-ish season. What can we say about that? Because that, I think, again, totally unheard of for me before I became Catholic. Like that, I would have thought, how is Christmas? Like, how's that penitential? And why am I supposed to be kind of thinking about myself and reflecting and being a bit like mournful-ish? Like to Christmas, like it's the Hallmark season, right? Like what?
Yes, that's right.
Can we unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, it's honestly very countercultural to even remotely hint at the idea that Advent could be a somewhat penitential season, because not only, the Hallmark movies, all the food. I mean, can you imagine trying to do Lent during the build up to Christmas? It would be near impossible. And so it feels very radically different. So it is a miniature penitential season in that what we're doing is preparing for a feast. So if you imagine you're having someone come over for dinner, and let's say it's maybe it's not like the most important person, or but it's like a long lost family member, or someone you just haven't seen in a long while. You're going to really prepare. You're going to think about the menu. You're going to clean the house. You're going to have the kids straighten their hair a little bit, and you're going to kind of give some tips on what are you going to do. But if you were to just jump right into eating the food that you're preparing before they even came over, that wouldn't even, and then they come over and you're like, hey, come on, have a seat, grab some food. We're about done here. That doesn't make any sense. Well, talk about, someone infinitesimally more extravagantly important that we're waiting for. And of course we're going to prepare, of course, to celebrate his arrival into our home. And we don't want to rush that. And so it's basically a season of preparing inside and out. So we are decorating the house, but we're also reflecting on what does it mean in my here and now life that I have a Savior who is also the God of the universe, who came in infant form. What does that mean for me in my own daily life? Am I going to take the time to recognize that? And because we are physical creatures, and the church recognizes that and sees it as good, and that's why we have the liturgy we have, right? Why we stand up and sit down and cross ourselves and kneel and do all the things that we Catholics are known for, right? Because we're physical bodies, that we need to participate in these things physically as well. So it can look like, things like eating simpler as we lead up to Christmas, kind of having a little bit more of a beans and rice menu for our family meals ahead of time. It means perhaps holding back on the sugar-laden treats and saving them. And I think it's also helpful to recognize or remember that when we are anticipating Christmas, we're not talking about one day. We're talking about then a feast day that's actually 12 full days. And so sometimes I hear that people don't want to celebrate Advent because they love Christmas so much. And so when they think of like, but I don't want to do a beans and rice kind of meal, and I don't want to maybe hold off just a little bit on the fun Christmas music and play more of an Advent reflective music because I just love Christmas. And I get that. I love Christmas too. And we're not trying to be purists here, and there's actually no way to fully be purist. You can't run into, a coffee shop and hold your ears. Nope, I can't hear Frosty the Snowman. It's not Christmas yet. We're not talking about that. But purposely exercising some self-control as a form of penance leading up to a grand feast day that's 12 full nights, that we've got time to do all the fun stuff. We just gotta hold on just a little bit, it's good for us. Just like a parent recognizes it's good to eat the broccoli first before the dessert.
Can I say, I'm picturing you going to a coffee shop and someone say, "Oh, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas." No, it's Advent. God.
Yeah, people have actually asked if I'm like that because I've written, a book on Advent. I talk about like, no. I promise I'm not a purist.
Yeah, like the I don't know, an Advent dictator or something. Like, no, it is Advent still. No Christmas for you.
Yeah. In fact, I might say it in the book, but I've said it before. Don't be that person, actually. If you want people to join you in Advent, don't be that guy.
Yeah. Which is the thing, like you said, it's so countercultural, and it is, right? Because it's the season of like, of work Christmas parties and friend Christmas parties and the coffee shop music and the Christmassy drinks and like the sweet treats come out, right? We both work in education, I think, and the staff room suddenly becomes full of all kinds of very, very sweet things. And I'm sure many staff rooms are the same. And it really becomes kind of countercultural to say, you know what, I'm just going to leave that for a second and wait a bit longer in the anticipation. But at the same time, like you say, we're living in the world. Like we don't be that person who's like, right, going to persecute others for celebrating a little bit too early this season. That no, we're hanging on to Advent. We're living the liturgy of the church, but that's not liturgy meant to like traumatize others or something, right?
Yes.
That makes sense.
Yes. And we need to remember that the liturgical calendar is a gift. This is not something that God is holding over us as performative. Or like let's see how well you do this year in Advent or Lent or whatever. It is a gift because we're human beings in an imperfect world, and God is inviting us to recognize the rhythm of how he has set up the story, the grand story that we're all part of. And so we need to recognize it as an invitation, and that parties are best when we're celebrating them with other people. And so if we want friends and family to partake of that, we need to, I'm not saying make it palatable as though, we have to sugarcoat everything, but recognize the reality of the world we live in, right?
Yeah.
And that it is okay to eat the cookie your grandma gives you if it's still Advent. It's all right. Right. But that, I hear this all the time. A lot of adults are, quote, sick of Christmas by December 26th. And they'll want to take down the tree within the first few days. They definitely want to take it down by New Year's. Well, one of the nice things about holding off on some of the Christmassy things is that you don't feel that way as much. You actually still enjoy Christmas all the way through. So there's a benefit to holding back just a little bit.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think so. I mean, we can begin to get practical, but I think this is one of those things that you build a kind of a culture. Right? You said kind of inviting in your family and not making it palatable, but making it this thing you do. And I can think for us and our family, we begin to build those traditions, and we do things like you mentioned, Christmas music, holding off on the Christmas music until Christmas and listening to an Advent playlist leading up to there. And I can think of our kids when they were even, they're still young, but even younger, when they would hear, their friends playing Christmas music or they're in their classes playing Christmas music and come home and this more kind of solemn Advent music, early on kind of go, why are we playing this music? This is boring. Like, where's the jingle bells? Where's Frosty? And we would try to talk to them as we could with young children and explain kind of the idea behind what we're trying to do here. But as they've kind of grown up with that kind of tradition of us playing, Advent music has become more of a normal thing, right? Where, okay, this is what our family does. We celebrate with the church the season of Advent, and we're listening to this music. And then at Christmas, it becomes a party, and that music that we held back on, we can play lots and enjoy that and celebrate. But it became for us, those traditions are something you begin to live and begin to, I think, be molded by and understand why you embrace it, and then it becomes what you do, right? And it becomes it's very rich that way, I think, living that out and living it more and more and more like that.
And the church even calls our homes domestic monasteries, right?
Yes,
It's in the catechism.
yes.
We're if we are parents, we are raising our children, hopefully, in this concept of a domestic monastery where we're forming souls, and we're doing so much more than just feeding people and bathing them and clothing them, right? We are shaping souls. And so when we can recognize a pattern that maybe feels different inside our four walls and outside of them, and even if the outside stuff isn't bad, we're not anti all the Christmas trappings outside, but when you walk through our door and it feels a little bit different, we're inviting our kids to recognize that there's kind of a rhythm to life that's actually realer than what we recognize outside the world, and so it's an invitation to step in tandem with God's timing. And that feels different. That hits different, and yeah, when you're 4 or 5, that might feel maybe a bit of a drag, but I will say my oldest is almost 19 now. And then my middle guy is almost 16 and I've got a 13-year-old. They all love Advent.
Yeah.
And that feels, they get it for sure because they've pretty much grown up with it now. They recognize that that's almost necessary for the fullness of the enjoyment of Christmas. In fact, I don't remember which of my kids said, earlier in the year when we were talking about like, what's your favorite holiday? One of them said Advent. Like they didn't say Christmas, they said Advent. So yeah, just for those of you with littles, hold on. I'm not saying it'll be perfect, but yeah, it feels weird. And that's because it is, right? I mean, we're supposed to be different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. It's supposed to feel weird. We should feel weird doing these things, right? We're in the world, but not of the world. Like there should be a kind of difference there, right? And it's not to say you're going to bust in the staff room and clear the table off of all the treats and declare it's not Christmas yet, right? You're not meant to make people feel uncomfortable, but you can certainly, within your house and outside your house, begin to try and live those liturgies out. And again, I love what you said, Tish, that it's not performative. Like I think Lent is this kind of magnified because you often take this kind of Lenten challenge. You give up something for Lent, right? And if you fail at that one day, oh my gosh, I failed. Like God's going to disown me. I've failed at this my self-professed challenge that I made to get this thing up, right? I mean, Advent's not quite that extreme. That we often don't make those kind of like solemn vows to give things up in the same way we do with Lent. Similarly, we should in a certain way, I think, right? You've already kind of mentioned the beans and rice kind of meals, but I think like it's so important to recognize that whatever we take on for Advent, and we have as a family ourselves taken on things and failed at them and kind of had to abandon them halfway through Lent or Advent because they weren't working out very well, right? That's not a failure in performing for God, right? That's just okay. You get that thing up. We'll try something different next year, right? It's a gift to embrace, not like a challenge to accept, right?
Right. Do you remember earlier in the year, this year, what is his name? The actor that's Catholic. Oh my gosh, Wahlberg.
Oh gosh, yes, I know what you're talking about. The Wahlberg challenge.
And they talk. Yeah, the 40-day Mark Wahlberg challenge. But that's what Lent was. That it's not a challenge. It's not a challenge in the slightest. And the spoiler alert to things like Advent and Lent is you are going to fail. You are going to not get it perfect because you are a human being. And that actually, the fact that we're invited to partake of it in our human ridiculousness, our ways of screwing up, of snapping at the kids during Advent, of forgetting and going ahead and eating the cookie just because we feel like it. Those are ways that that God can use them as grist for the mill of us of our refinement in recognizing, man, do I need a savior, and what a gift it was that Jesus came the way he did. And what a unique outside the box, never would have guessed in a million years way God chose to save humanity. The mess ups along the way serve as reminders that, guess what? You can't do this perfectly. And that's why I'm coming.
I'm still laughing at Mark Wahlberg's 40-day challenge.
I know.
That was a thing. I thought I'm going to call Lent from now on Mark Wahlberg's 40-day challenge. That's the new name.
On Easter morning, great. Some of us in a text thread, we were like, "Happy end of Mark Wahlberg's 40-day challenge."
Fantastic.
It's not Easter anymore. Yeah.
And that's how strange we look to some of the the outside world. What are these guys? I don't know what some kind of challenge he's doing. Who knows?
That's right.
Whatever. We gotta find. We have to brand Tsh Oxenreider's Lent challenge. We gotta our Advent challenge. We gotta reframe that.
Countdown to Christmas.
Yeah, bumper stickers. Right. We gotta figure that out. I think that's there are so many interesting things you can embrace for Advent. Right. I had. A couple years back on the show, I had Michael Foley, professor at Baylor, the guy who wrote Drinking with the Saints, right? So he's a really fun guy, really wild and quirky guy. He had wrote a book about Christmas traditions, and he was talking about how we're talking about different Advent and Christmas things you can do as a family, right? To make to really embrace a liturgy and live that Catholic like life. It lived the season out right to its fullest. And he mentioned the Christmas goblin, and he just was like, "Are you serious?" And he unpacked this traumatizing thing that he does with his kids, this ancient German tradition of this Christmas goblin that he would scare his kids with every year. And I'm like, Michael, do they need therapy now? And he's like, well, I think they might actually, because it was really traumatizing. So I'm thinking of, we haven't yet begun to embrace the Christmas goblin in our house. Although he challenged me to try that. So maybe this is the year we should try that.
Right.
But I'm thinking of that there's so many things you can embrace at Advent to really deepen this season. You mentioned the Jesse tree. We've as a family kind of embraced that. But I'm thinking of the years when we tried too much. Like the one year we tried the Jesse tree, an Advent wreath at the table, and my wife had the idea, and maybe it came from you, I'm not sure where it came from, Tish, it probably was you, now that I think of it, of getting 40 Advent books and wrapping them, and unwrapping one book every day as we led towards Advent. So the one year we tried all these things, and it was like musical chairs. It was like, okay, so who is opening the book today? Who is lighting the candles? Who's doing the Jesse tree? And it became this kind of absolute chaos, right? We had to actually make a schedule in the end to schedule who's doing what. And and if it was wrong one day, there was a fight at the table, and there's things being thrown around and hurt feelings and crying, mostly from the adults at that point during the crying. But that for us was a lesson of, okay, you can maybe try too much. So there's, I think, a balance there. But there is also the lesson there's such a wealth of Advent traditions that you can embrace and share and begin to build in as part of your embrace of the liturgy, of the liturgical calendar. I mean, there's anywhere from the weird Christmas goblin that Dr. Foley was scaring his kids with every year, to Advent wreaths, to the Jesse tree. I mean, it's so rich. I don't know, where do you begin? Where do you suggest maybe beginning to look deeper, to try those things out, to dip your toes in the well of Advent and begin to draw from that? Where do you begin?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's a great question, because that's probably why a lot of people don't bother, because it feels so overwhelming, right?
Yeah.
And we also have this feeling if I start something, I need to finish something. But I will give, the spoiler that I have never once, we have as a family never once have fully done a thing from the first day to the last day, right?
Yeah.
Because real life, right? We've got some kind of concert and baseball practice, and dinner got started late, so we need to wind up. There's just, life happens during Advent season. And so if you go in thinking of it as a challenge, right? Or thinking of it as a marathon, and you get to run through the finish line if you do all the steps, then you're going to end up throwing in the towel or beating yourself up or whatever it is, instead of remembering it as the gift it is. So I will say the first thing to do is, you can't do everything. There's a lot of great ideas. Pick maybe two. The first year, pick two. You can always add more. but pick two and pick things that don't require you to have to catch up if you get behind. So what I mean by that is there are some books out there that I think are delightful that tell a story over the course of Advent, and you read one chapter, then the next, and the next. I think those are great. The problem with that is if you miss 2 days, let's say, because of life, then that one day you have to read 3 chapters, right? And then you're up late. And so then that kind of snowballs. And by like day 11 of Advent, you're like far behind and you're frustrated. Yeah. Pick something that if you have to pause, the recognition of Advent for 2 or 3 days, when you're back at it, you can just pick up where you left off and turn the page. Super not to, plug my own thing, but that was actually the motivation behind the format of the book, the Advent book I wrote, was because I needed something for my own family that was like that, where it's like, I need to just flip to the 5 days later because we're picking it up again and I didn't miss anything. So I would say for sure, pick something like that, and then pick something that's sensorial. So if you're going to have a book, that you're reading as a family or reading personally as a devotional, pick something that involves one of your 5 senses. So whether that's like lighting a candle, listening to music, I don't know. I'm trying to think of the 5 senses. Smelling something? I don't know. That's weird. Maybe don't smell a different smell every day, but do something that's tangible and reminds you of your your physicalness. And so a lot of families do the candles. That's something that we've loved to do is with our kids. Kids love doing that, and I don't know if your kids are like mine. They still do this as teenagers. They fight over who gets to light the candle, right?
Oh yeah.
Every stinking night. It's hilarious. It's like, guys, anyway. So do something like that. And if that feels good to you, then you can add something else if you want, but no pressure to do that either. Do whatever actually connects you to what your ultimate goal is, right? And that's an inner renewal, an inner penitential walk toward what we're recognizing on Christmas, and a communal one, in your domestic monastery, something that you think will, if you've got children, that will connect with them. As I mentioned before, I'm not a crafty mom, but there are crafty parents out there,
I've heard of them. Yeah.
I've heard they exist. And there's tons of stuff like that people do that I think are just adorable, that they can make things and recognize them, or do something with the crushes, the nativity scenes. There's all sorts of great things you can do, but just don't do too many to where you're just going to feel like you failed by week 2, because you are going to screw it up, and that's okay.
Yeah. That was our big learning in trying to do too much, right? But again, you said like you said that those kind of things that you can't catch up. Like I'm picturing like, you're behind like 3 days on like the Advent reading, and everyone's like at the table until like 9 p.m. trying to catch up, like reading before they can go to bed, and they're exhausted the next day when they wake up and they're just dragging themselves. And Advent becomes this season of like zombie family because you're trying to squeeze in all this like extra liturgical living. I think that's a great point, right? And just and to give things up if you need to, like to just shed those things, right? Our big fight is lighting the candle, right? Then also blowing out the candle. So we had to have a bit of a schedule for who lit it and then who blew it out, because that became then the fight. And we taught our son how to lick his fingers and put the candle out, and that became then like the star of the show. Like, I can do this, and it was right, because kids love fire like that, right? One of my favorite things that I think I want to try, again, taking on too much, maybe this is crazy this year, is you have the manger, the nativity scene, the creche, right? But then you have the wise men, and they approach, right? They approach from far, far away. And I love this because you see this, some churches that know what's going on, right? We'll do this with their creche, right? They'll start the wise men back in the confessional or something, and slowly they'll move out, right? And you're in confession one day, and there's like a camel next to you there, like on the kneeler, because he's on his way out day by day up towards the altar, right? But I love the idea, just to add a bit of, I don't know, fun or spice Advent, right? That like, okay, where are the wise men today, right? With young kids, that kind of thing makes it fun. And then that's a discussion, like, well, why are the wise men traveling? Where are they going, right? And I think something that we have learned as converts is like just the value of just normalizing weird Catholic stuff, right? So
yes,
just like normalize the fact that we talk about things like the wise men and the nativity and the birth of Christ. And that story is something that's just in our bones. So of course there's wise men wandering around the house during Advent, right? Because that's what we do, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. That's right. No, I completely agree. I think the normalization is what makes it fun and what it helps our kids embrace a Catholic culture that perhaps to us we recognize as normal, but to them, because they got started younger than you or I, it doesn't feel as, strange, or maybe strange, but in a good way, something they get to embrace as their identity. And I think the other thing that's helpful maybe for parents or just busy adults in general is Advent sometimes feels like one more thing to do. Like if you think of it as the Christmas season instead of its own season, then the thought of like Advent feels like a layer on top of an already busy season. What you can actually do instead of adding one more thing, you can actually subtract or stretch out a thing. So one way we participate in Advent, and we don't do this perfectly, but we like to do it, is slowly decorate the tree. So, if you get out a tree in early December, and this is hard with kids, I will recognize that, or at least with little kids, but you can put the lights on and just have the lights on for a week. And then a few days later, or the next week, just slowly add some ornaments a little bit at a time. So just slowly decorate the house or just slowly do some of the things you were going to do anyway, that you're thinking of Christmas as a busy season, but maybe it doesn't have to be, you're just kind of stretching out the stuff you're doing anyway as a form of Advent participation.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah.
I know for my wife, one of the things that she wanted to embrace, like last year, a couple of years ago, this began with this wrapping of the Advent books, right? So we bought a bunch of Advent books, kind of put them in order, and so they kind of matched the season of the liturgy. Different feasts would hit at different times. It was very, very complicated, well coordinated. I wouldn't have patience for that, but and then wrap them all, right, and then. For me, that I couldn't. That's not my thing. I'm not crafty. She's not that crafty either. But I'm even less crafty than that. But for her, that was like this embrace of the season that then became in itself a kind of liturgy, right? That right. Lovingly sorting the books and wrapping the books and organizing the books, and that in itself was kind of an act of welcoming in Advent. And I think that's really neat. That kind of. Okay, I'm doing Advent, and I'm picking things to do at Advent that are really going to help me to get into that season, and in a deep way that kind of like not just I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, Tish, but not just kind of picking things at random and doing those things, but picking things that are going to allow you to just deeply live that out in a way that in this case. Just loved on us as a family, like drew us into Advent along this idea that she had. So maybe I'm trying to say things that draw your family in together, maybe not just things you're kind of imposing on them, but things you're kind of cooperating together to build. Is anything in that makes sense?
I love that. That is a really good way to look at it. I think that's completely true. Our kids still we make beeswax candles for Advent. We order them from this company that you just get sheets of wax and the strings. And so we start off by making the candles first. And that is, I think, almost as fun, if not more fun than lighting them throughout the season. And we use a trunk from Kyle cuts down, a branch from one of our, outside, so our wreath is actually a tree trunk, and he just drills holes, candle-sized holes in it. And so it feels very like not only organic and natural, because it is, but like local, it's like from our house. It's not some store-bought something or other. So there's a lot of ways you can embody this idea and embrace the preparation of Advent as part of Advent itself. So you're exactly right.
That's really, I want to come to your house for Advent. That sounds really, that sounds really cool. Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it is.
I mentioned before music, and I think it's probably your playlists that are playing in our house kind of nonstop around Advent time. But again, the idea of those senses, and I wonder too, deepening. I mean, because you meant the domestic church, of course, right? A lot of this is taking place there. The church itself changes deeply at Advent, and I think, and I always love, I'm thinking back to the Christmas Eve service at the Evangelical Church, where you'd that often that lead up to the Christmas Eve service, there already are trees on the stage, right? There already are lights. There's probably the sermon series we're going through is probably a Christmas-ish sermon series leading up to Christmas. After Christmas, it's kind of done, right? But there's a bit of like that Christmas story already kind of permeating before Christmas proper happens, and then Christmas hits and it's there, and then kind of it's done. I've always loved the magical transformation in the Catholic Church, like the actual the church building, right, where the season of Advent, things look quite different during Advent, and then there's that you go on a Christmas Day, right, Christmas Day Mass, or during Christmas season, following Christmas Day, that Christmas tide, and the church is often just exploding with life and joy, and the trees appear. I don't know what team does this, but the trees appear overnight. Between Christmas, between the end of Advent and the next day, Christmas Day, the trees appear and lights are up, and all these things kind of explode into the scene. And it's like, wow, I believe in Christmas. I believe in Christmas elves in that situation, because I don't know who else is doing this apart from Christmas elves.
It's the sweet old ladies. Yeah.
It is. It's on ladders, like putting up the lights. I can picture that.
That's right.
But it's kind of amazing, like the actual church, that kind of transformation, right?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking of ways to embrace the Advent season by church attendance. There's often up here for us, kind of prayer services, special masses that are like a penitential kind of mass during Advent that's meant to kind of turn ourselves inward to look as we prepare for the coming of Christ. What can we embrace of what the church offers, like in the church liturgy during the Mass, and like in that aspect outside of the house, the home, that deepens our kind of experience of Advent? Does that make sense? I rambled a lot there, so I'm not really sure.
No, I get it.
What's in there to take?
I think this might even happen in Protestant churches as well, but the song that I think of that always kicks off Advent, right, is O Come, Emmanuel. Yeah. And that is always the song that the processional, leads into the church service. And so I think there is something about recognizing the music being intentional, usually, at most masses, that we're not singing yet, O Come, All You Faithful, or any of, the full-on Christmas songs. That the Advent hymns are very well chosen and very particularly chosen, as well as the scripture reading. So I think it's a good idea to, before, maybe go to Mass a few minutes early if needed, for having enough time to read the scripture in advance and reflect on them and recognize. I like to do that if we can anyway. It doesn't always happen because real life. But I think there's something about that as well. I think there's even ways we can participate in how I don't know if your kids were younger when they started going to the Catholic Mass, but the way we dress even can be a way we participate more, like recognizing that this is an important season by maybe smartening up just a little bit more. I have teenagers, so this is always a conversation we are having in our household. There is that sort of thing. And then, my big thing with our kids at our age is talking about what was said in the homily, talking about what it is we are doing when we are participating in all the rites and rituals and things like that, but just embracing that a little bit more by way of particular conversations in the car on the way back from Mass. I don't know. Are those things that you're thinking of, or are you thinking things particularly during Mass itself?
No, I think that's it, right? That's it. Those things that you can intentionally do, or we'll see, being done. And that music, of course, that's a huge one, right? That's it, when there are Christmas carols playing everywhere else, we're still singing these songs. What I love is by the end of Advent, those songs, because there aren't terribly many of them, right? And I think
Yeah.
I love people like you who are intentionally building beautiful playlists of a few more extra songs we can hear that are still Advent-y themed, right? Yeah. But those songs get a bit tired by the end. And I think that's kind of the point though also, right?
It's kind of the point.
Yeah, you're ready for those Christmas songs. And when those get cranked out, right? Then it's that much more meaningful and beautiful and powerful. Yeah. So I think that's a huge aspect. And I just love the full sense experience, right? Of that, right? The church is a bit more subdued and stripped down, and musically we're a bit more subdued and stripped down, and we're all a bit more kind of solemn, and then things just crack wide open at Christmas.
That's right.
It makes it that much more meaningful. And last year our kids are part of the children's Christmas choir, so that was quite the cracking open was cracking open, and then the kids behave themselves when this thing explodes. And one of two of them were in the choir did. The other one kind of reluctantly sang, and that was an experience too. But,
that's funny. There's also just really great feast days during Advent as well. You know, we've got St. Nicholas Day. Obviously, that's a way that families can recognize the distinction, you know, and remember that, you know, when we're talking about Christmas, that's Christ's Mass, you know, that is a particular distinctive day from St. Nicholas Day, which is December 6th. And you can do that separately. You can do St. Lucia's Day, which is big in Scandinavian countries during the season. And then you hinted at the goblin thing. And that is from Germany. There's like, depending on what your heritage is in your family, you could look into maybe some other ways that Advent is celebrated around the world. There's some really great resources out there actually that recognize, because there's like a Christmas witch from Italy, and you know, there's all sorts of interesting things, and you can maybe incorporate that as well into your Advent and just kind of make it interesting and fun, and, you know, connect your heritage to the church's rich heritage as well, you know?
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, right? Because we think sometimes Advent, I mean, Advent feels for the Catholic convert like this new kind of invention in a way, right? I mean, it's obviously very, very old, but you forget that it's been celebrated for 2,000 years in all different cultures. Yeah, so there are those weird, like the Christmas goblin, all those other weird things you can, I say weird, I mean, that's not very kind to say of.
It is weird though.
There are those things that you can embrace. And I totally forgot about St. Nicholas Day, right? That's a huge, that again is a huge kind of counterpoint to Christmas, right? Yeah, here's Santa Claus, the real Santa Claus, kids, and here's when we celebrate him much before Christmas, right? And here's kind of the purpose and the backstory, and we've yet, Tish, to get ourselves organized enough to do that. I'm ashamed to say, but that's one of those things I think we're okay with. You know, you got to, some years we'll get there someday, right? But that's again the pick and choose kind of, don't take on too much and kill ourselves kind of thing, right?
Oh, for sure. We even literally last year, it was like 2 days later that we did St. Nicholas Day. It was like, oops, sorry, kids. You know, I wanted to go to our local little chocolate shop in our neighborhood and get coins, and they were all sold out. So I just like found, I don't know, other random candy and just kind of threw them in their shoes. Like, here you go. So definitely, you know, give yourself a lot of grace, but there are a lot of ways you can do this, you know, and along with music, there's so much great art. You can include that, looking at art. You can even incorporate, depending on your kids' ages, movies and films that hint at, that aren't maybe your traditional, you know, elf and the classically Christmas. There's other ones that kind of hint at a sense of anticipation and waiting as well. There's all sorts of ways you can do this.
I love it. I love it. I'm glad to hear that you had to throw some chocolate in shoes. That makes us feel a bit better, I think.
Totally. Yeah, completely.
That's awesome. Thank you. Listen, this is a lot of fun. We could talk for hours, but I want to thank you for being here. You have a fantastic book, of course, on this subject, which is why I wanted to interview you in the first place. So maybe tell us a little bit about that before we go. And I'll put links to that and your stuff in the show notes. You have all kinds of fabulous stuff. You have a Lent book as well, and a lovely newsletter, wonderful podcast, other awesome books besides. Like, there's a lot of stuff that listeners can dig into. So I'll put links to those things in the show notes. But maybe just tell us a bit about the book before, because we love it. I want everyone else to know a bit about it. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, it's called Shadow and Light, and it is the Advent book I wrote for my own family, because I was looking for something that was rich, meaningfully rich, but not so out of, inaccessible to children when I wrote it at the time. It is a daily read that you can either do personally as a devotion or communally as a family or as a household. And it is very short, and it is based on the Psalms. And the Psalms are intentional because of a little bit of that penitential sense, a little bit of that expectation, and also the joy. All the emotions are found in the Psalms. And it is, I share a reflection on the Psalms, and then I have a reflection question you can ask as a family, a song of the day, and an artwork of the day. And I tell people, that was 5 things on one day. Pick 2. If that sounds like a lot. So do not feel like when you open the book and you see this, on one day that you have to do it all. And then also it's open and go on purpose, meaning that you don't have to prep anything other than, if you want to do the candles and light those as part of this, because I do mention which candles to light, whether they are purple or pink or white. There's nothing else you need to prep for. And if you miss 2 or 3 days, you can just turn the pages and just pick up where you left off. There's not a, continual story necessarily. So that is the book. And at the end, it does have readings if you want to read slowly, the birth of Christ with the prophecies all the way through the Gospels. So that's an option too.
That's awesome.
That's the book.
And if people finish the whole thing, they get an autographed certificate saying, "Congratulations, you've accomplished this." Right?
That's right. You won Advent. Good job.
I love it. Oh, it's awesome, Tish. Thank you so much for being here. Coming back. I don't know how I tricked you into this, but I really appreciate it. And listeners, I'm sure will love this.
I love it.
So thank you. And I want to say God bless you and the awesome work you're doing for the church. And thanks for joining us again this week. This has been a blast. I really enjoyed this.
Thank you so much for having me. It was so fun to talk again.